I have the pleasure today of introducing our dynamic moderator for the afternoon. Most of us know her from her nearly 3 decades that she has spent as a highly accomplished news anchor for WXIA TV 11 Alive News. She's an 8-time Emmy Award-winning journalist and communication expert who currently hosts Lawmakers and Lawmakers Huddle on Georgia Public Broadcasting. Please join me, everyone, in welcoming Miss Donna Lowry, who happens to be my soror.
Okay, it's on me now. I didn't know whether you were going to introduce our wonderful, wonderful author today. I have had the chance of the last 2 days to talk to her, and today to really get to know her, and I've decided we're best friends. The book I loved so much. Imagine getting a chance to meet the author. You get a chance to do that now. Please join me in welcoming Charmaine Wilkerson. My new best friend.
Hello.
So we're finally here.
We are.
And we get a chance to talk about your book. And so, not your first time to Atlanta, I'm thinking.
It is not. In fact, I wrote a few pages of Black Cake here in Atlanta when I was hanging out with some writing buddies several years ago.
How many have read Black Cake? I'll admit, I told her this, I read Good Dirt first, and then I had to read Black Cake. So, and I love it. And I just finished it recently, so it's still living with me. So I'm very excited about it. Okay, so we have to start with, I would think that the book came out of and you talk about this a little bit, your interest in the pottery that was made by slaves. But that's not where you started this book. Talk about that.
Yeah, that's not where I started this book. First of all, is everyone hearing me all right? Because I have a much softer voice than Donna.
That was kind.
No, Donna has a wonderful voice. But Donna and I have something in common. We both worked as journalists in television originally. And that's really where the idea for Good Dirt came from. When I had finished university and just started working as a reporter, I would find myself walking into strangers' homes on the worst day of their lives. And I found myself sitting down to have very intimate and difficult conversations with people. And I would go home at night and just ask myself, how will they manage? How will they manage when their very personal pain or difficulty has now become news? Other people are looking at them. Other people are watching them. Even now when we have social media, I may choose to put something on the internet, but what if you don't? And what if everyone thinks they know who you are? So I just suddenly had this little girl pop into my imagination, and she had gone through a terrible experience and found herself growing up with other people constantly, sort of going forward with a narrative of who she was. They seemed to know who she was. She was that little girl from that terrible event. And this controls everything that she does from then on. So that was where the idea began.
And then you get into her as an adult and a very traumatic event. Thinking she was going to get married and then getting jilted so horribly.
I know, and it's awful. I mean, it would be awful for anyone, but she grows up constantly being seen as this unfortunate person. And finally, she's in love, she's going to be married, and she feels that, I'm doing all right. But in fact, she hasn't been doing so well. And so when the romance falls apart, she feels she needs to escape. And one of the things that has happened on that terrible day is, people have seen the cover. Can you see the jar in the cover?
Yes.
So in the
But you can see her face too. I love that.
You can see the face, which I love. Yeah. Kudos to Jaya Miseli who designed this cover. But you asked the question about where did this begin with the jar. in the very first scene that I wrote, it was just something in my head. I just made it up. It was in my imagination. I heard a jar falling. And this was a very well-off family. They could have owned a number of different things in their home. But I thought, no, I want this object that is destroyed on the same day that the protagonist's brother is killed. I want this object to say something about the family and to say something about us as people. And so I began to do research, and I discovered the story of the real-life enslaved potters of Edgefield, South Carolina. They weren't the only ones, but there were entire teams of enslaved people who mass-produced pottery. They were skilled potters. They were enslaved, though. So they're living a double life in which they have skill. They may even enjoy working with clay. Their ancestors may have worked with clay in countries in Africa, as in the case of the person who made the jar in this story, but they're still held in bondage. So it's a complicated existence. And then the jar travels north.
It's fascinating to me that you imagined the jar falling, and you took a story from that.
I didn't even imagine it. Honestly, are there any writers in this room? Yes,
Ooh,
I
lots of
recognize
them.
one of them. So you know, where each of us is different, but what happens to me is I have an emotion or I have a question. And in this case, it was the question. Something awful had happened, and I thought, how do we manage? What is that magic in humanity that allows us to go through terrible things and still love and laugh and be productive and take care of people and hold our communities together? And it's a question I have every day, including now. And that question came to me, and a scene came to me. So I didn't say, let me think of a little girl and a jar that falls. I heard what I thought was a vase falling. I heard gunshots, and then I heard a little girl crying. And so from that, an entire scene. Where are they? Their neighbors are in the garden, in a beautiful garden, in a beautiful place. And so that also brings me to the beautiful life they had. Because, you know, something terrible happens at the beginning, but it was really important for me as a writer to show what she had lost emotionally. Why? Because she had a wonderful family. They had a beautiful life. They had an interesting history. They were a prominent family in New England. All of that is life, and all of that is family, and all of that is love. So it started to come to me emotionally, but then I had to do the research. You know, what is that jar? Where did it come from? Their family had seafarers, black seafarers. What was the reality of being a seafarer in the age of sail when some people still were enslaved? All of that was the research. And the research began to feed me with other story ideas.
So you started writing about this young girl. So you start that, and then do you stop and then do the history, start investigating and looking into the history, or what's your writing process when it comes to all of that?
So I tend to write, and then I stop and think, but what, it's always about questions. But if his ancestors were seafarers, and I knew there were black seafarers traveling up and down the Atlantic seaboard, even when some of them were enslaved, what do I need to know about that? So yes, I'd stop and read. But then I might be writing another scene, and the other scene might be Abby with her brother before he's killed, and they're playing in their grandparents' backyard, or they're being silly in the house, because there is a lot of love in this book. There has to be, because then what is the point? When we struggle or when we suffer, when we miss someone, we're missing an entire life, a person who's brought something into our own lives. So I write out of chronological order, I should let you know. So a little bit, you'll see that in the way that I speak.
We saw that, yeah.
So that explains, so I wrote that scene, maybe I was doing research, and maybe the next morning another scene came to me. It did not have to be the scene that followed the first one. And so I often do that. I write entire scenes and chapters that are completely out of chronological order, and then I put them in files. I put them away. And it's part of a story that's in my head.
I loved how you went back and forth that way, because as you mentioned, as journalists, we do these stories with real life people, and then I'm always thinking what led up to whatever happened, and then after doing the story, what went on with their lives afterwards. How did they deal with the trauma? How do families deal with trauma? You wanted to put that trauma part into this. That was a big part of the book on so many levels.
Well, it began with trauma, and again, it began with that question of when a person is suffering and struggling, how do they learn to move forward and carry their pain and still live lives that are full in terms of productivity or love or laughter, even as they struggle with loss or trauma or bitterness? How do we do this when, again, there's that public gaze? You know, the news report that follows you all the way through adolescence, the people who've read about you before they meet you at high school or before they want to date you, all of that. It is interesting. It has been there, and it is a question. And so I let Ebby lead me. Ebby Freeman is the protagonist, and I just let her lead me.
Let's talk a little bit more about Ebby. She has to deal with being jilted, and she decides the best way to deal with that was to leave the country. There is a couple paragraphs I'd like you to read about that, her process of deciding to leave and go to France.
Yes. So I realize that many of you have been reading this book. We're going to be careful, though, in case you haven't, about spoilers. But this happens really early in the book. Really? Oh, is anyone laughing? Has anyone not read it?
How many of you have not read it? There are
a couple of people. Don't worry, this is very early in the book. We're talking about one of the first few chapters. Everything terrible happens right away. and then we keep going back, and then also we go back into the past. So this is a story that goes from the relative present day, right before the pandemic, to the distant past, the mid-1800s, and even further back. And so there are other things that happen. But early on, she has survived a terrible home invasion robbery at home. Her brother is killed. She grows up, she meets someone, the romance falls apart, and that's it. She's from a long-time New England family. She's born and raised in Connecticut. And something that's important is she loves Connecticut. She loves Massachusetts. She loves being part of and from New England. So here she is deciding she needs to get away. Just 7 hours. 7 hours of flight, plus the train and a car. And Ebby will be in a place where no one will recognize her. No one will look at her sideways. No one will cup their hands over their mouth and whisper, "It's that girl, you know." At the racket and swim club, at the bagel shop, at the supermarket, people back home go through the motions of being discreet when in reality, they want Ebby to hear what they're saying. What a shame about the wedding. After everything she's been through, they want Ebby to know they know all about her. Only they don't know. Otherwise, they would tell themselves to forget. Forget the wedding. Forget the shooting.
Ooh, it's beautiful. So you're talking about the trauma. Then she goes on into to France, but the story doesn't end there in terms of what goes on with her life. What made you want to have that part of the story in a different location altogether, a different country?
Well, definitely she needed to go to a place where she thought she wouldn't know anyone. Okay. And in the story, she does know someone who has a house there. But it's a very quiet part of France. It's an area of France that I happen to know, so I know that the likelihood of meeting someone you know if you are American as opposed to British is very, very low. And it's semi-rural. So it seemed to be a perfect setting for this. And in the book, as soon as she goes there, of course, she feels great. She feels much better. But it's a very important part of the story because she thinks that the way to live a better life at this point is to distance herself from everything that she knows and to distance herself from the painful memories. But what happens when you do that? you lose everything that you are. You lose who you are, her family's history, the stories that entertained her, the lessons that allowed her to study well and become quite a responsible professional, even if she's struggling. And so that's where the jar comes in. The jar was a family heirloom, and it was a sort of repository for all of these stories about who they were as a family, how they went from hardship to prosperity, how the different generations accomplished different things or had different experiences. But mostly, it's about that period immediately after an enslaved ancestor takes the jar and moves to Massachusetts, and what life is like there, what it is like to be a black seafarer, what it is like to be someone who was punished for trying to draw on paper as a child, but who begins to use artwork. So that's sort of a semi-spoiler, but it's not a secret.
No, no. I think the thing that I kept trying to imagine was this 20-gallon jar, clay jar, being taken from South Carolina, basically, up into New England, and then being passed along, and how awkward it may have been to have something like that. But to understand how precious it was to the family. And I don't know about any of you, but it made me think also of things in my family. And I mentioned to her, I have a spoon that was passed along. It is silver. It is all by itself. It looks like it was a baby spoon. It's like black because it hasn't been polished. And I remember my grandmother having it. I have no idea what the story was. And those are the things that I think your book brings out, is to make us think about what actually was passed along physically and through the stories that we have.
And especially in our society, by our society, it could be general, but I'm speaking of the United States. In modern society, so much is given monetary value. And so I do see how important it can be to understand the stories, because it's the story that gives value. In this particular book, just as in my previous novel, Black Cake, it was that recipe or the making of the food that carried stories, that gave it value. And especially, if I may speak for a moment to the culture of the protagonist, Ebby. Yeah. Ebby Freeman, basically, she's born into a wealthy family in Connecticut. Her family, as you know, has ties to Massachusetts. Longtime family. They've done all right. They've been fortunate. They're well off. They have a foundation. They're professionals. They don't have to worry about income. And so it was really important for me, as I said, to think, but what really has value in that family? What has value in that family is this big old food storage jar that used to prop open a door a couple of generations before, that was carried north because it was a food storage jar. It was perfectly plausible for it to be carried, right? And to a lot of people, when they see the jar, they think, they expect something more stylish, or they expect something, daintily painted. They expect something that is recognized as having extreme monetary value. Instead, they see this big old jar sitting on a table in the studio, and they know it's important when they visit the home. For the family, it's also a source of entertainment, because in order to pass the stories from one generation to the other, you share stories with children. So the story of the jar is told like an adventure story, and it's entertaining. And that also is why they call it Old Mo. And that also is why there's a kind of emotional investment in that jar. It feels like a little person, yeah?
It's a character.
It is a character.
It's a character in the book.
Yeah.
You almost expect it to speak. Because, it really has the stories in it. And, I don't want to give anything away. This is the tough part about saying things like that. So speaking of secrets, there are secrets all along. Everybody has secrets. As you go through the book, you realize Dad Ed has secrets, his wife So. So why was that important, that those secrets, really juicy secrets in some cases, these secrets were a part of it.
You know, fiction, despite what people might think, even with black cake, even though my mother made a wonderful black cake, I make stuff up. My stories are fictional. This is a fictional story. But it's always about emotional truth, isn't it? Things that we either have experienced ourselves or seen or heard about or read about. And, you know, wanting to keep secrets, more to the point, shame or embarrassment or guilt. These are very important things in our lives. These affect so many people. And so in each case, each person, it's not that they're saying, oh, here's a secret I have to keep. It's that they are overwhelmed by some other emotion. And for that reason, or by the fear of the other person's reaction. In Ed's case, there's guilt and there's fear of how people will react. And so he has a secret, a huge secret, that, oh, it's kind of a spoiler, but will turn out to be a kind of a nice secret in a way. But it's because he feels very guilty about everything that's happened to his family.
Yeah. Let's talk about Henry a little bit.
Oh, Henry.
We got to know about Henry.
Are people booing Henry? Does anyone have? You can go ahead. You can boo Henry.
Okay, boo, boo. So Henry's a photographer, looks through a lens and sees beautiful things, and yet he's missing something when he's not looking through the lens, to me. And that was the way I looked at it. I'm like, he's a photographer. How is he missing the fact that she has this trauma and not dealing with it? I mean, everything, and like I said, this whole spoiler thing, but the alarm clock, and there were different things you put in the book that kind of inform us about Henry's character. But tell us a little bit about Henry.
Well, I love how you say that, Donna, because then I'm going to counter.
Okay.
And that is what I love about writing and finally having an opportunity to publish work is that, okay, so I wrote this book, it's here, it's great, I'm happy, I'm thrilled, but the story isn't over. And what happens in this room with readers and among our, in our conversations, the story continues. So when I wrote the book and I looked at Henry, I thought, Henry is not seeing himself. Donna says Henry's not seeing Ebby. What I think is Henry realized that Ebby had struggled, and it was all right with him. He's actually a kind of a supportive person at the beginning. Right. But he doesn't see himself. He doesn't understand that he, well, again, we don't want too many spoilers, but the idea of...
Go for it. Even the people who haven't read it, okay.
Yeah.
Listen, okay.
Plus, we can have this conversation. I'd love to hear from some of you later as to your interpretation. But I think of it as, Henry, what were you thinking? Yes. You know, you didn't see yourself. I think Henry is an innocent. You will say, oh, he's terrible. I think Henry is an innocent in this story. In our lives and in our relationships, often what we learn, it's easy to love. People say it's not easy to love. It's easy, it's natural. We love people. What is hard is accepting the responsibility and the sticking power that comes with that sometimes.
Yeah, he had the secret too. I mean, the secret that
he had
led
a
him
secret too.
To not even show up and tell her why he wasn't marrying her.
Exactly. And that's because he didn't see himself. He was not critical enough about the choice he was making.
But he didn't see how he was hurting her and adding to the trauma.
That's,
okay,
again, I'd like to see what your opinion. I have my own opinion. I think sometimes we decide we're going to do something.
Okay.
And we know it's not right. But we just do it because he does think that that's probably his only choice. But come on. I mean, there are ways to do things. You can do things in one way, or you can do them in another, even if you disappoint someone.
I also wondered about the fact that his mother was not happy about this union, and so whether that was somewhere in his head.
So I want to be careful to not dictate to anyone who has read or is going to read any more about how they feel about that. But you see, so Donna has that question, and I think that there's no doubt that the nuances of how two wealthy families who raise children who are extremely similar, really, born and raised on the Connecticut coast, never wanting for a meal, good education, working, happy in their families, pretty much, yeah. Even though Ebby has suffered tremendously, she was born into a loving family and a mirthful family, and she has more than one generation before her. So she's doing all right. And Henry, too. But there's a big difference. He is white and she is black. And so there are elements in this story that address some of the nuances there. You know, especially in modern times, it's easy to paint a very clear picture of one person not liking another because they're different. But it's not that simple. And certainly in that culture in Connecticut, you have two people who actually, in many ways, seem made for one another. But there are those nuances, and the mother, I think Henry's mother, for her, it's not really too palatable, this relationship.
And the relationship, I mean, Ed's feeling about moving the family to that area when his mother was against it and realizing they were the only black family in the community, that was a big part of it too, for how Ebby looked at things and probably how, you don't think how Henry looked at it? Okay, so you're the author. So I think how Henry looked at things maybe too, because of this difference.
It's, I think that it would be the charitable or the generous thing of me to say, you decide for yourself.
Okay.
Because Donna, no, but I
agree.
I'm listening to your comments and loving your comments. Thank you. What I want to be very careful about not doing is to narrow down an interpretation, because it's really, the book is a conversation between each reader and the story. And so I'm hearing what you're saying. And yes, you could look at it that way too. But also, there are other issues, but also what about Ebby's family?
Right.
So actually, it's very easy to say, oh, Henry's mother wasn't very tolerant. But you could flip the coin and just think a little bit about what it was like for a long time, prominent Massachusetts family, black family,
Yeah.
to see their granddaughter planning to marry the son of a banking family in Connecticut and thinking, is that such a good choice? So, you know, you will see in both families some doubts.
Right. You talked about some of the little cultural things, you know, when we were talking, that you put in there about the grandmother in particular. You put in like Jack and Jill and Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. So you put those things in there. Talk about why you put those things in there.
So I have an idiosyncrasy. Anyone who has read Black Cake will have noticed it if they've also read Good Dirt. I have a way of being very specific about some cultural, even geographic details, but without naming them, because I don't want to pin the story on that specific detail. I didn't want to pin the murder on a specific town, even though I know exactly which town it happens in my mind. I also never named Jack and Jill or Alpha, but hello Alphas, there's some Alphas out there.
Yes.
But if you read it, you might have already picked up on it. I talk about a social club for African American mothers and their children, and the volunteer work that Baz and Ebby do. That was important in part because they were the only black family living in a white enclave on the Connecticut coast. I did want to be sure to show that they were active in their own way in a black community, even though they were distant from their relatives in Massachusetts. Also, they're a well-off family, so often you would have youngsters from certain families going to Jack and Jill. And so I don't name them, but it's going to be the only club in New Haven, yeah. It's going to be obvious to a member. And also because it doesn't matter so much as in the story, what really matters is the fact that they're being exposed to other people in their community and in other cities. And with the sorority, the grandmother in particular, it's part of a humorous episode about why the kids don't understand why she's being so fussy about what her yard looks like when the sorors come over, when all they're going to do is sit around the house and eat finger foods. You know, so obviously they're talking about community projects as well, but that's the way the kids see it. You know, why the fuss?
I love the the fact that they have the history of slavery with Moses, and then we see how the family moves through that to become prominent, but then also how they give back too. That was an important part in terms of, you didn't say Underground Railroad, but they housed people as they were coming through, and other things that they feel are important as a part of their culture.
Yes, and actually they benefited also from that. So yes, there are stories of people from the family, but not only black, and I do want to specify, but people of different backgrounds, but from the same geographical area. And there are stories of how they connected and how they grew together and how they helped each other. But they are references along the way. This remains very much the story of this young woman and her family and how they lived in the world. And so then obliquely we learn about the black seafarers, the blackjacks who also navigated the waterways, learning to read and write. If anyone has ever read the book James by Percival Everett, that wonderful book, he takes the subject head on. The idea of this double life where people read and write, and so there is a reference to that in the book Good Dirt. So, but it's not as much about that as James's life in Percival Everett's book.
Yeah. So Moses didn't let on how much he actually knew, and he made sure his ancestors kept that secret about how educated they were as they moved on, as Willis moved on, and all of those things.
Well, they had to. I mean, it was a matter of life or death. But it was interesting because I've seen this in the historical record. It's obvious that the person who holds Moses in bondage knows that Moses knows how to read and write. And in fact, there are some details, which I won't go into for the people who haven't read, that are kind of interesting, what Moses is doing with his literary skills. Not literary, excuse me, literacy skills. And so it's an interesting give and take. And I think the one thing that, or there are two things that I think this book does with the idea of the enslavement of people and holding them in bondage that's interesting. Moses actually experiments with pottery. His mother came from a long-time caste in a country in Africa, which today we might call Mali. She would have been from the Mande people. Again, I don't name specifically, but she was one of the Numumuso, which I don't name in the book. It was a caste of women, and their role was to make pottery. And they were even seen as being sort of connected to the spirit world because they could make things from earth. But the point is, so the idea is that Moses has an affinity for the pottery, but he's still held in bondage. And he still has seen things, and he still knows that even if the person who holds him in bondage knows that he can read or write, in a moment that could go away. If it's a choice between supporting him and betraying him, or economic expediency, that's going to be the reality in Moses' life. So it's a fine line to tread, but I felt that that was very important, especially now when we look at the ways in which fiction can add to our view of history. Fiction is an interesting way to bring stories that are documented in a way, but by fictionalizing them, we bring them into a more, we bring them to a broader audience, because maybe you're not going to pick up a book and read about Blackjacks in the Age of Sail. That is the name of an actual book, which I had to order and wait for 2 months to read in order to...
It wasn't available?
It wasn't readily available, and I was overseas at the time, and then I got it. And then I went to a museum in Boston, and since they were having an exhibit on the jars, this was after I'd already written the book, but had not published it yet, I saw copies of that book, so that was nice to know. But the point is that there are things that are actually on the historical record if you look up the articles and look up the archives and go to JSTOR, which is a research arm, as you know, or call up the Schomburg Library, or call up, there's something called the SC Consortium in South Carolina, which has amazing information, but who knew? I wouldn't have known if I hadn't been looking for certain information. Going back to the point I'm trying to make is fiction is a wonderful way to bring some of these elements into conversation among the general public. And that's why I think fiction is important in storytelling, in telling the story of history, because we're not always aware of the sources. There are textbooks, and then there's all the other stuff that the scholars and the archaeologists know and write about that might not reach us. And the idea of a nuanced story that is talking both about things like an enslaved person who can sail, who can board a ship and leave port with the permission of the person who holds that person in bondage and travel. You might say, well, why did they come back, you know? But the answer lies in the fact that you were held in bondage and in an environment in which someone can track you down, right? And so, or might not want to harbor you because, well, you have to go. So there were all of these interesting nuances, but it was important to show that a person could be on a ship and be afraid because they are enslaved, but love the water. Or they could meet other people from other countries who sort of looked like them, but were different, and learn about the greater world. Or that the people navigating the waterways might not just be carrying people from one part of the river to the next. They might be carrying printed materials that could be read by people who were enslaved and who were not supposed to be reading or writing. They could be carrying letters. They could be carrying objects. Because when it's part of everyday life, despite everything we've seen in the dramatic movies and in the very real truth-telling of what may have happened in the 1800s, very often people were coexisting and taking for granted. Many people, like the people who went up and down the riverways. So it was possible for them to transport people, transport messages, transport objects. You know.
It was fascinating to me to think about that. I don't know, I guess when I think of the people escaping from slavery, I think of them on land. I did not know about all of this seafaring that took place. And I love that Ed felt this connection to the sea. And he didn't fully understand that, did he?
Well, he claimed, he felt he had a connection to the sea, that it was in his DNA. So just to back up, his family grows up in the interior in Massachusetts. So even though Massachusetts and Connecticut are coastal states, you may not be living by the sea. And he really, and also because of his work, Connecticut made sense as opposed to Massachusetts, say Boston. But the point is that he reasoned that he must have it in his DNA, the fact that he had ancestors who were seafarers, because he just felt a visceral pull. He felt the need to live by the water. And it's as simple as that. He wanted to live by the water. He always had. And so eventually he moves there with one child and his wife. And later they give birth to Ebby. But yeah, he says it's in his DNA, but he's not a sailor. He's not a surfer. He's always at the water. He takes his kids clamming. He loves being out once in a while for a recreational boat ride. But he's not a seafarer, not in the way that many families are fisher people or navigators, even today in places like Connecticut and Rhode Island and Massachusetts.
Did you determine early on, I want to get back to something else, and that is the mystery of Baz and what happened to him. Did you decide early on how that would play out?
I knew some of it, but what's wonderful about writing is you pretty much see a story you may even know. I certainly knew something about the ending, not every single step, but the overall important ending that we won't talk about because it's a spoiler with the jar. But I did know that it was a home invasion robbery, because here's another nuance. So often in the news, violence is associated with certain groups of people more than others, and we know that. Well, what if, and this is part of Abby's reality. She's a wealthy family, she's living on the coast, and the most likely crime occurs in a place where there is no crime. Sadly, a home invasion robbery. It could happen. It has happened to people. And So people even continue to report the little black girl who survived that terrible tragedy. Even though it's a terrible tragedy where people came into their home, that little black girl, there's a layer of always identifying her as such. But did I know? What I knew was that it was a home invasion robbery. Okay. What I knew was that they worry about the idea of violence being connected to their blackness in the narrative. So I'm being very blunt in my language. And so I knew something about the reasons for the home invasion. Well, it's a home invasion robbery. But why did the murder take place? Yes, I knew from the start. And although it's not spelled out, it is kind of hinted at. It's not spelled out early in the story, but if you decide you're going to commit a home invasion robbery, and you know what you want, and you want to get out and get away, you're not going to be planning it when people are at home. So, you can put two and two together. I knew that. I knew that they weren't expecting people to be home, and things get out of hand. I also know why the gunshots. I also know why they fired. And I won't say it here because I think it's explained later in the book for anyone who hasn't read the book. They don't go in planning to kill people. They go in planning to steal. And then this teenage boy is killed. And yes, I know exactly why he's killed.
I'm glad you gave us a perspective on who Baz was, too, because we lose him in the beginning, but we get to know him a little bit more.
Yes, I hope so. Do you feel that you got to know Baz a little bit more? Because I love Baz. He's a great kid.
Yeah.
He's a great kid, and he adores his little sister, and she follows him everywhere. And so that's why in the first scene, I'm getting emotional thinking about it because, yes, I wrote a book, but these are characters. They are like people to me. They have their own lives now.
Yeah, just like I just said that Black Cake is still with me, those characters are still with me. As an author, I'm sure that always those characters always stay with you, right?
Yes, because they came out of my imagination, but then they have entire lives. So I may just write about part of the life of a character, but it's like sitting in the room with all of you. I may know your name, but I may not know how many children do you have. As I write, then the character tells me how many children do they have, or what hobbies do they have, or how did they meet. And then there are things I'll never know.
Yeah. So you and I talked a little bit about the fact that Black Cake, and I know we're here to talk about this, but for those who've read it, and like I said, I'm still living with it, those characters were so powerful with me, that it is it's on Hulu and Disney right now. There is a movie.
Yeah, there's actually
an
8-part series.
It's a series?
And it is a little different from the book, but
I just learned that.
But it was.
They loved it. I can't wait. I may start watching tonight.
So some of you have seen the series.
Yeah.
Okay. So there also are differences between the way in which the plot plays out, even though it's really basically the same story. I mean, I love what they did with the story.
Okay. So are we going to see something similar with this?
I don't know. No, really, I don't know. And Black Cake was unusual because someone already, a number of people, and then they decided to work together, approached us about doing a series before the book was physically published because it was ready. It takes a while in commercial publishing. If you have a publishing company that's fairly large, they have a lot of books, it takes a while to prepare the book. And so the manuscript was actually being shared with a couple of people, and so that's how
that was your first book.
Yes,
that's
and
amazing.
It's unusual. I'm very grateful and really enjoyed seeing what was done with the series. With Good Dirt, so then I wrote the book, and now it's out, and things I think are happening in a more linear way. So I know next year it'll be in French and German, and I know that certain other things are happening, but you don't know. It may stop there. And we may just have this, and I'm happy because I wrote that. So,
Great. Let's. just because you mentioned it, let's talk about it. So is Black Cake also in other languages?
Black Cake was published strangely, but I think it was also because of the pandemic. Everyone was reading. Black Cake, ooh, I hear.
Just want to dance a little bit.
Let's call again. I like that. I like that ringtone. Black Cake was published in 20 languages over a couple of years. So it was published in larger countries, I would say, in France and Germany and Italy, in Brazil and Portugal, and then in many countries in Europe and also in Russia and also in Israel. And it's interesting because these were countries that then very soon after became embroiled in warfare. So I don't know what happened to the books, but certainly the publishing community is one community. And it crosses languages and it crosses cultures. So people are always in contact and they're always sharing stories with one another. But of course, when things happen economically or politically, that then may completely affect the publishing world as a business. But people are still reading.
So the themes carry over in those other countries?
I would have to ask a reader in each country because it's very interesting to see. Well, we read, here's an interesting thing, and I'm going to say this about stories that have characters like mine. Often people who look like me or who may have come from a background like mine, American-born, spent time in the West Indies. My parents are multicultural, but raised in the West Indies. And I wrote a book about the quintessential American family, right, from New England. Often people say, like me, say, it would be nice to see more stories like this in the pages of a book. And often there are people who say, yes, I would like to see people who look like me or talk like me or have stories like mine in a book. But I grew up reading all sorts of things. And I grew up reading stories written by people who look nothing like me or nothing like me. And so I think, yes, stories do cross cultures. And here's an important thing. When we often talk about wanting to see more voices, a greater variety of voices, especially within the United States, in the pages of a book, it's not just for the people who look like those characters. It's for everyone. I mean, these are books for everyone. It's just that sometimes people forget that, yeah, those of us who say, gee, I haven't heard any stories about the Black seafarers, but my great-grandfather was a whaler in Massachusetts. Well, of course those stories might be interesting to someone else because I've read other people's stories. And I still read other people's stories. Yeah. And what I see when I read other people's stories is the commonality. Isn't it always about the same few things? Isn't it always about loss and longing and betrayal and love and friendship and community and injustice? Isn't it always about the same thing?
True. That's true. Very, very, very true. You talked a little bit earlier about the connection between taking something and turning it into fiction. And I know there's a little part in your book that we talked about, maybe you'd read a little bit for us, that deals with that a little bit. And it's near the end, but it's not going to give away anything.
No, it's just a couple of lines. Is that all right? So this is, again, just to give context, but without giving it away, this is Ebby's father basically talking about the family heirloom at a certain point in the story. And he's actually giving a news conference because they've decided they do want more people to know about the history of that object because it says something about their family. So this is what he says right towards the end of his press conference. The story of the jar is not only the story of the Freeman family or of African Americans. These stories are part of the complex fabric of this country. History, too often, has been told from only certain perspectives, that this is not good enough. History is a collective phenomenon. It can only be told through a chorus of voices, and that chorus must make room for new voices over time.
I love that. I love that. Do you learn a little bit about yourself every time you write something? Does it change something in you? I know you're learning from what you're, investigating and finding out, but do you?
I think so. For anyone here who has written fiction, we can write memoirs. We know that we write memoirs, we can write nonfiction books that are very interesting. But for me, especially as a former journalist who, in theory, was dealing with the events of the day or the happenings of the day, and those were dictated to me, fiction for me is my way of processing the world. And so, yes, I'm learning a little bit about my questions. I don't necessarily have the answers, but I learn about the questions that preoccupy me. I learn about the things that cause me to think about humanity with a sense of marvel. Because this book in particular, is very autobiographical only in that question. How do we manage? I continue to be horrified by what humanity is capable of every day. But I continue, there isn't a day when I do not marvel at how beautiful people are, And this is all in this book. But it's an exploration of that. It's an exploration of what is it that makes people part of a community? What is it that makes us who we are in our families, who we are to the person on the street? What is it that makes us laugh and love and get into new arguments even when we've had the worst thing happen to us, but we still get into new complications? I explore humanity. So I may not have the answer, but I understand more about what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing in the world.
Yeah. You get into the strength that we have within us through Ebby and through a lot of the characters, the things that within them that I think we can all relate to.
I hope so, because as I said, the book begins with this awful thing, and Ebby really does struggle through much of the book with questions, but she comes from a wonderful family, and we have fun with the family. At least I had fun writing about them in that crazy library in their grandparents' house, and the caricatures that Baz used to draw with the jar in it as a little person with these big feet and a big belly.
I love that.
So it's a book can explore difficult questions and still be a celebration of life.
Yeah. So we got to talk about what you're working on now. Are you working on something?
I'm working on something that I'm pretty far into it. It's not official yet, so I won't say, but it is influenced by the idea of food, a bit like Black Cake, but it's not at all the same story. It's one that's, again, looking at how people find meaning in their lives, very often through very simple rituals or seemingly mundane objects or foods, and how that can be a point of departure for telling a bigger story.
I love that. I wanted Black Cake the whole time I was reading it. I mean, like, I just, I told you I got married in Jamaica, but I never had Black Cake, so.
You did not?
No.
Oh, gosh. Someone has to remedy that. Are there any good bakers in Georgia who make Black Cake? Any Jamaican food restaurants in Atlanta?
Oh.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I know her, too. Oh, okay.
I have a jar of fruit soaking right now.
Wow.
Yes.
So, did you have to actually cook a you tell me your background with Black Cake, and I'm sorry for those of you who haven't read it, but
yeah,
you'll want to read it, and then we're gonna I'll let you ask questions. Yeah.
All right. So in terms of cake, I stress that Black Cake is not the story of my family, but when I was writing about these girls in the Caribbean who were open sea swimmers,
that was fascinating.
The Black Cake came up naturally because that's something that is part of that culture. And in that moment, I saw the potential for having it as a symbol and also a part of the plot in the story. Why? Because my mother made a legendary Black Cake.
Wow.
She was from Jamaica, born and raised. She did not call it Black Cake, nor did anyone in my family. We call it plum pudding, Christmas cake, Jamaican Christmas cake, rum pudding. And she actually sent a recipe to me years and years ago. And one day, a younger member of my family texted me on my mobile saying, "Oh, do you have a copy of that recipe?" And I said, "Yes, actually I do." And I have kept that recipe all these years. It is the recipe that is important to me, not so much because it has the recipe, but because my mother wrote it.
Yeah.
It's a handwritten letter. And she writes about other things, like what she's going to do when she retires and just different things. But yeah, so there's that story. And I had made black cake, but my black cake was never black. It's supposed to be very dark. It was always kind of brown. And so it took me a number of years to figure out how to get the right color, how to get the right texture. It will never be as good as my mother's, but it's pretty good.
Oh, wow.
It's
I
pretty
love
good.
that. I love that. Well, I want you to ask questions. So I know there are some people with microphones around here. So raise your hands. And there's one right here, one back here. There's
And
a
then
few.
someone up front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. I know I'm hogging the conversation, but I love this.
Thanks for listening. I love being in conversation with Donna because we did have similar
Yes.
professional backgrounds, and so you can relate to that idea of, having to talk to people at the worst possible moment.
People who've lost loved
Yeah.
ones, people who, who've had lost children in particular. Those are the hardest stories.
Yes, and so one of the things that I learned was how much people love talking about the people they've lost.
They do.
They'll show you photos, they'll tell stories, they'll even laugh, even as they are raging with sorrow and anger. And so, stories. We need our stories.
It's a catharsis, I think, for some.
so
Okay,
does
who's
someone have a
first?
microphone?
Who's first? Okay. Who's?
And also, thanks. I know some people have to leave. Everyone has a schedule.
Yeah,
so
sorry.
thank you for being here. Those of you
Yes.
who are Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. Who has the microphone right now?
Hello?
I
Just
do.
start speaking.
Oh, right there. Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi. So glad to be here today. Thank you all for doing this. I'm a journalist as well, but my question is, was Good Dirt always the title? Or what was your working title?
Thanks for the question. The working title was Book 2.
I love it.
Then we started just calling it The Jar, but we knew we wanted something else, and actually the title had been suggested way back when during a lunch with my editor, and she said, I was talking about Good Dirt, and she was saying, ooh, that could be an interesting title. But when the book was finally finished and being reviewed, then a couple of us built a case for why we wanted Good Dirt, because there were a couple of other possibilities. And because it shows up in the title, because it refers to clay and soil for growing, and because it also, in American culture at least, makes you think of gossip.
Yes. Absolutely.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Is the microphone on, though? Because I heard you,
Okay.
but, oh, okay.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you.
Here you go, right here. Can you stand for us,
Yes,
please?
ma'am, I can.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I just want to say I am a proud member of the Henry Hater Club. I just want to say that.
Okay.
Poor Henry.
I just wanted to ask you because I'm a fan of both books, and I noticed that throughout the book, especially at the beginning, Abby is pitied a lot because of what has happened to her family and everything that's gone on with her. But I love how you just wrote her to still be filled with dignity, and she still has a lot of pride in herself, and I still notice that in Black Cake as well. And as like a fan of African American fiction, a lot of times our stories are told out of pity. And I just wonder, like, how do you write dignity into your characters in a way that even though something tragic has happened to them, we don't pity them, we see them as empowered women specifically.
Good question.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. And then the question, each person, when you sit down to write, you have to find your own way. What I tend to begin always from the point of view of a character. So I imagined this person. I imagined a person who really had everything she needed, except that one huge, huge, huge thing, and how it has affected her, but how she has never lost sight of the fact that someone else's narrative is different from her own narrative of herself. That is so true of so many people. Other people telling you who you are or who you should be. She knows pretty much who she is. She just doesn't know how to get out from under the weight of other people's gaze and also from her own sorrow. I mean, the sorrow is part of who she is. So how did I write that? In little ways. I just knew that she was a fortunate person. Not everyone has her good fortune. So I'm sorry, if you have that education and that job and you have fun parents and mirthful memories of your family, well, you know, you already have a lot going for you. So I just found little ways to show that. Yeah. But also, actually, I should say, also her mother. Her mother was it was very important for her mother to instill in Ebby that you are living your life. We don't want this, what has happened to us, but you are living your life, and always be present, centered, be, you know. So there was a bit of that also as she was growing up.
Yeah. So, I love that. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for this book. I'm not done yet, but I love, love, love the experience, and you are definitely an artist. So, 6 years ago, I read a book titled Our Kind of People by Louis Otis Graham. Okay, some of you familiar with the book, right? Okay, so when I read this book, it was my introduction to a subculture within the Black community that I was not aware of. I have nothing to do with the upper class Black people. I'm as low as you can get. But you know, I'm just wondering if you yourself are part of this subculture. Did you have long time proximity with it? Did you do research into this subculture like I had to do to even know about it?
Thanks so much for that question. So Our Kind of People, interestingly, I actually read that book when I was doing research, because I thought, that book, it's been out there for a while.
Yeah.
And I thought, I want to see, you know, you're talking about someone from a family that's considered to be upper class, but also African American. And this person sort of tried to break down also some conflicts, meaning snobbery,
Yes.
exclusivity, some of the things that people complain about in other communities. And so it was very interesting, but also some of the standard hallmarks of the lives of people who are quite well off and you know, join certain clubs and prioritize certain environments. So I actually read that thinking about being sure that certain experiences were part of the experiences of the Freeman family, but they are not. I think the Freeman family are not like the families described in that book. It's a very interesting book if any of you ever want to read it, and I won't say any more. You touched on that. Going back to the idea of my background, I was born to two people who immigrated from the Caribbean, became American citizens. I moved back to Jamaica with my father and lived there, and then came back, lived in New York. I went to two schools that are considered quite elite, and so you pick up on some things. I have family in Connecticut, I have family in Massachusetts, but a lot was research also. I went to the community where Sojourner Truth lived for a number of years, where there was a multiracial, I use the word race for those of you who don't use the word. I do use it because we know what we're talking about, but there were Black people, there were white, I think there may have been a Native American living in a community, an abolitionist community in suburban Massachusetts. So I did a lot of research to look at the homes, to look at the way in which people lived. I know Connecticut pretty well. I know the Connecticut coast pretty well. And so it was a combination of observation and a lot of research and some personal experience. But the short answer, which is hard to get from me,
You're doing well.
is the family in Good Dirt is nothing like my family, unless you say, yeah, I have family in Connecticut and Massachusetts, and in fact, my stepsisters live right where Sojourner Truth used to live, but it is nothing like my family. So there was it truly was fictionalized. But the research and the observation and even reading books by people who I felt were not quite like them, this was important to me, to try to convey what it would be like to be in that environment. Also, probably my father was the only black man living in his town in Connecticut in the day, but his experience was very different.
Wow. I love that. Other questions?
Hi there. I have a question.
Yes, there you are.
I really appreciated how you kind of challenged us not to villainize certain characters, specifically Avery. She was
Okay, the microphone close to your mouth.
Yeah, that's better.
How you allowed us to really challenge that that tugging of not villainizing someone so immediately, specifically Avery. I'm curious how you came up with the character of Avery and how even her and Abby even had like a friendship connection, even though they had the complexity with Henry. So I'm very curious about like why Avery, why was she important, why was she kind of inspiring, why did I kind of want to be friends with her, that type of thing.
Why you want to be friends with
her.
Avery? Oh, okay.
Yeah, Avery's okay. So hey, I even kind of like Henry, but you know, I wouldn't get involved with him. But but Avery, yeah, it just sort of came about naturally because there are two things. One of the things that fiction allows us to do that we don't always want to do in our real lives is, who is that person really? Why does she have to be a bad guy just because she happens to be a rival due to circumstances, or because she happened to be quite intentional about being with Henry? But you know, why can't she be someone that actually we kind of like, even though we don't want to like? And that's what I love about fiction. We can explore that idea.
Yeah.
You know, also because there's a continuum. Abby fell in love with Henry. And well, I really care for Abby. And I would like to think that if she fell in love with Henry, even though part of it was because he didn't even realize who she was at first, and that's part of the attraction, I like to think that Henry had his qualities, right? And if Henry had his qualities, why wouldn't Avery? You know, really, that's who we are as people. We often are villains by circumstance. And even the people who commit that awful, awful crime, we will stop short of a spoiler, you will learn a little bit more about the people who destroyed the lives of the Freemans.
Yeah.
And you might stop and think, huh.
Oh, huh.
Yeah.
Okay. I love that. Other questions?
Thank you.
A couple others.
Hello.
Get to them.
Hi there.
Okay,
How are
so
you?
I just want to say that I am also Jamaican American as well. My dad, he is from Mandeville. And I just noticed the parallels between the family dynamics. They're very strong in Black Cake and Good Dirt. And I wanted to know if like you pulled that from your own experience or if you observed like communities that have that strong connections when you build these families in your books.
Thank you for asking that question. I'm looking at all of you. I'll bet you would understand this response. I see communities like that and families like that around me all the time. Yeah, all the time. I just don't always see them in books.
Yeah. Very good.
Thank you.
Is it-
Hi, I had a question. She asked my question about Avery, so that's great. But my other question is, we see the very physical manifestation of dirt itself, but I also wanted to talk about the metaphor of dirt. I saw it as transformative for the characters. Like when Abby and Henry first met in France, she fell into the dirt of the river. And also when Henry was missing and they found him in the dirt, he was transformed again. So I wonder if that was in your mind when you were writing it. And also it made me think about if you've ever been to the lynching museum in Alabama, they have jars of dirt where people were from sites of lynching. So the dirt is carrying energy, and it's transformative energy, whether it's good or bad. I was wondering if you were considering that.
Thank you. That's such a
question.
thoughtful question. Was everyone able to hear that?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
So yeah, well, for me in general, dirt and water, I don't know what, but for me in general, dirt and water, even what I'm working on now, I was sharing a bit more with Donna, it's about food, but there's without a doubt dirt, the soil, the land. If anyone here follows the Bible, and anyone who has read the Bible, and I even refer to it in Black Cake, for dust thou art, everything, we come from the earth, we come from the water.
Yeah.
And so yes, the idea of soil as transformative for the potters, because you can make things with that. The idea of soil as territory. Ebby leaves the place she loves most because she feels she cannot survive and be healthy there. She hasn't quite figured it out yet, so she runs away. But there's always earth, and there's always growth, because the earth for her did have positive memories. Her mother's garden, the clamming, which is sand, but that's earth. The water, they love the ocean. She loved growing up by the ocean. The river. So yeah, for me, I think that's, without a doubt, it's a personal idiosyncrasy. I think about water and dirt all the time.
I love
But
that.
what you say is so evolved compared to the way in which I'm expressing it. And I really love what you had to say about transformation. Yeah.
Okay. I know there were a few more. Oh, right here.
Yes, and then there were a couple of people in the middle, yeah, so.
Hi.
Who has the microphone?
Can you stand
Oh,
so people
Alan.
can see you?
Sorry,
Hi.
because the lights, I'm very light sensitive, so if you see me squinting, I can see your faces, but not as clearly. Hi,
You've
Alan.
talked about the jar, which is an heirloom, which carries stories with it that are passed down. I kind of feel like we're at a moment where we live in a very disposable society. Very few people write letters. Fewer people keep journals. I don't know that many objects are passed down with a family history. Do you feel like that is maybe the case? And how do you feel like your book relates to the society that we're in now?
Certainly we're in a more disposable society, which can be useful sometimes. I've moved a lot, so I know that I don't always want to have things of value, or I want to have something that can be broken down. I'm sorry, I'm a fan of flat pack furniture in building an office. But without a doubt, thank you for your comment, Alan. I really think about this in another way, which is there are so many people who have not had the privilege, which some families have, of having grandma's chest of drawers or something passed down. Certainly my family is like that. My family, without a doubt, is like that. No two people were born in the same, no two generations were born in the same place. And across each generation, people came from other areas. And so it's not that we don't have things that we may love or value, but they don't necessarily go very far back in time. And I love the idea of something that you can carry with you, yeah? In Black Cake, it's just an idea of a food that she remembers and loved. But in Good Dirt, that jar, they're never gonna let that go. And so when the jar is broken on the same day that they lose someone they love, it is a devastating symbolic moment for them. So going back to society, I think what you're saying does connect a little bit to the idea of value, however. That it is true that often we'll go for something newer, it might have value, as opposed to something that's older. But it depends. If you're living in Georgia, chances are many people here have things that go back more than a couple of generations. But if you talk about African Americans in the United States, you often have a story where you don't have things that are going back many generations. Moses loved the pottery, even though he was forced to do it for many hours at an industrial level. And his mother also was a potter, so maybe he inherited that. But there were no objects. The person who took the jar had nothing else, you know, except maybe a couple of pieces of food and piece of paper, etc. And that is the story of so many people who, despite having lived here for many generations, despite having built entire communities, find that they may not have anything that goes all the way back. There's a book, and I talk about two books that are completely unrelated. You talked about correspondence. Yeah, I used to write letters all the time. I lived overseas, and my aunt would write me little letters, and I would write letters to my mother, who wasn't with me when I was overseas. I don't write letters for the most part either, but I do write. There's a book that's very popular. It's called The Correspondent, that just came out this year, which I just loved. And it's about this older woman who all she ever does is write. She writes letters. So you learn the story through her letters. But that's kind of an old-fashioned book written by a very contemporary person, because in the past, people would do that all the time. A book I love is a nonfiction book written by Taya Miles called All That She Carried. And it's cited in the back. In the back, you'll see some of the things that I read that connect to this book. I read it separately. It had nothing to do with writing this book, but I kept thinking about it because she talks about Ashley's sack. And Ashley's sack is a calico bag that an enslaved woman filled with provisions and gave to her daughter just as she realized that there was a good chance they were about to be separated. You know, there were changes in property and so forth, and she realized they might be separated. In fact, they were, and the person who receives the sack never sees her mother again, never sees any of her relatives, but she survives, and she grows up, and she has a family, and she has other generations, and they're still living. And one of the other generations, I think it was the granddaughter, embroiders the sack with a saying that says something about the fact that this was given to her, you know, her grand, by her mother, and she never saw her again. And it touched so many people, it ends up in a museum. So Taya Miles writes a nonfiction book about this bag, this sack, but in it she is unpacking, pun intended, she is unpacking all sorts of other information about cultures where you don't have things that last. But going back to your comment, Alan, about the culture that we have created, where maybe we have a choice, maybe we do have things we can hold on to, and we're not always holding on to them, because the newer, the shinier, the more expensive is special. And in Good Dirt, half spoiler again, the jar, you know, neighbors walk in and they look at the jar and it's kind of like, gee, this big old thing is sitting on a table. What's so special about that thing? Then they look at it and they realize it has its beauty. But over time, people learn that in fact, that particular object or objects like that are gaining monetary value. And that's interesting. All of a sudden it's, oh, well, isn't that interesting? I heard they sold a similar jar. All of a sudden, this jar is interesting, when actually it is the most valuable and most interesting thing that this family owns. So yeah, I don't know. Do you have, what is your feeling about that, Alan? Do you have?
I don't know. I fear that maybe
Oh, sorry.
the art of passing down legacy is becoming lost.
So Alan is saying that maybe the art of passing down legacy is becoming lost. Who feels that way? Or do you feel that, really, really interesting? And you know, there will be different opinions as to why that's happening. But what I do say is that for me, the story is what gives something the greatest value. Even when something is priceless, did you hear what happened in the Louvre?
Yes.
Okay, so I was reading about these jewels worn by so-and-so and so-and-so. I don't even remember who half of these monarchs are. But the point is, yes, they actually are jewels. And they have monetary value because of their physical beauty and the way in which they were made. But ultimately, it's the story.
Yes.
The story of these people who lived long ago and they were monarchs and what happened. And then it's been sitting in the museum until recently. So, you know, I'm sorry. It's terrible that they stole these things. I don't mean to make light of the museum, but these things happened and it's happened. But is it more valuable to me than that recipe that my mother sent to me in 1990 when she was living in New York and I was living in LA? No. And my mother is not with us anymore, so when I see that, it's a letter written in pencil, as I like to write, still legible, but talking about all sorts of other things, which is why I've never shown the whole recipe on the internet. I've shown parts of it, but also sharing her recipe, I love that. And I keep it with my passport when I'm at home, folks. So, you know, that's a sign of value and what I need. If I need to run out the door, it's going to be with me.
You want it.
So yeah, you know, we live in a society where perhaps monetary value skews things, mobility, and maybe not all of us have the opportunity to have inherited, but we make value through stories. And I also think that if we don't have something like that, that's okay too. If what you have is the story that helps you to build your identity, helps you to build relationships, helps you to define yourself even when others are trying to tell you another story. So stories have power, words have power, as I say here. And as we'll see in Good Dirt, that's a big spoiler. We won't say any more about that.
Okay.
So there you go.
Yeah.
The jar is a character.
It is.
Could you hold the microphone?
The
just
jar
a-
is a character
Thank you,
to
yes.
me.
Yes.
And the one thing that surprised me, but I liked it, was when people could drop notes in the jar. Yes. So tell me more about how you came up with that idea.
So I'm going to be somewhat cryptic because, again, I know some people haven't read it. But yeah, the jar is used for a lot of things in its lifetime. And when I imagine scenes and they just come to me, often they just come to me as stories. So they just come to me. Honestly, I just make stuff up. But I feel, and it came to me as an idea, that the jar would play a different role in each generation. So the first time it goes to Massachusetts, there's a reason why this jar is important. At the end of the story, there's a reason why the jar is important that has always been true. But the function of the jar, it's a food storage jar about this big. So it props open a door, people leave messages in it, right? I won't go into the details of which messages and why. But this links back to what I said about the blackjacks going up and down the river. That so often, when people do not consider the life of a person to be of value, they miss a lot of things.
Yeah.
They miss a lot of things. Yeah. So there are always things going on.
Yeah.
There are always things going on. And so that's an example of something that's going on, and some people know it and other people don't.
Yeah.
Because they just discount. They don't think that something's going to happen right in front of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So messages, and once you read it, you'll understand the major
Yeah.
message. But
But-
we're not going to talk about it.
Yeah, but it's also true with literacy. And
Yeah.
we won't say what happens to Betsy, but remember Betsy?
Yes.
Betsy actually only speaks directly. I mean, she doesn't, it's always a third-person narrative, but we only hear very directly from her in one full chapter, although we see her. And one of the things is her literacy and how she defines herself and sees her world, and how other people have no idea who she is.
Yeah.
But she knows who she is.
I love that. I think we have a
Okay.
few
Hi.
more. One
Okay,
more.
sorry.
You tell me.
Okay. So before I ask my question, I want to plead the case for Henry.
Okay.
Henry,
Poor Henry.
I like to think of Henry not as trash, but as compost.
As compost.
Yes, as compost.
Potential.
Yes.
No spoilers, no spoilers.
And for that, I had some other questions, but I wanted to ask a question that did not have spoilers. Very vain question, but I noticed that there's this cover for the book, and then there's the UK cover for the book. So which cover do you feel as the author best represents the story?
So explain.
I'm sorry.
Explain that there's
So-
a difference in the book
Okay.
covers.
Yeah, I
Apologize.
wish
So-
I had a, let me see if I
And
have a,
This is from Google. So
is this my book? Oh,
That's
there it is.
mine.
we
yes,
see-
please.
Here we go.
We see the cover that is the jar,
Can you
but
see
in
it?
the UK version, there's like a picture of a
woman with the afro, which I presume is ebony, and the
Yes.
flowers around it.
So there are flowers, and
Yeah.
there's a woman, and that is supposed to represent Abby on her wedding day,
Yeah.
which is the second day when everything goes wrong.
Right.
So I actually love both of the covers. What's interesting is the covers, you have conversations about what is important in the story, and then the covers are proposed by artists who are working with the publishers. And because each culture is different, the UK culture, and so that you know, the UK cover also goes to the rest of the world in English if it's in their territory. And the US cover goes to the rest of the world in English in their territory. So this is in Canada, and it's also in the Philippines. But this cover is in Italy. This cover is in France. This cover is in Australia if it's published in English. So I like them both. I must admit, I do love a cryptic cover. So you might have guessed that this cover was done by the same person who designed the US black cake cover. Because when you look, you might see the jar, but you might not notice the face. Or you might see the face, but you didn't realize this was the jar, excuse me. I know that's true because people say that. And I kind of I like cryptic covers, but I love this because this is Abby on the day in which she thinks she's won. She has won against her grief. She has won against the stories, against the dirt that everyone has, their narrative of her. Now she is going to begin a domestic life with someone she loves, and she's going to feel just a bit better. She will have fulfilled the hopes of her parents that she continue to move forward in life after her education, that she begin to have an emotional life that's fulfilling. And it's also the day that the second thing goes terribly, terribly wrong. And so I like that cover also for that reason.
I love that. Well, I think you're going to
ma'am.
make me wrap this up.
Yes, ma'am.
And so thank you to everybody with the library system for letting me be a part of this.
Yes, thank you for such a wonderful book discussion today, and thanks again to all of you for joining us this year.